So hello everybody. Today we're doing the daily reflections of what I've just had today and the videos I've seen, whatever I comment on. And today's been some interesting ones, which is Jesus Christ and Donald Trump and how they relate, how they are one structure, just showing itself. But what people cannot see about it, because they're always looking for a God out there, not the God that is made of structure and geometry and consequence that's in front of them. Then we have an interesting one about Elon, him talking about what is consciousness, where is consciousness, how does it emerge, blah blah blah, and it's just like ultimately backwards. So you have your world's richest man just narrating over and he still cannot see, and I'm correcting him. And if someone can correct the world's richest man, what does that mean about him? What does that mean about everyone below him? What does that say about the entire civilization and where it's pointed and where it's headed and what it's reflecting? So there's that. And then there was a thing about Wall Cinnamon, men talking about reality and what's wrong with reality and what's wrong with the world while trying to sit outside of the consequence that they are a part of the issue too. They try and sit from within the inner walls and believe that the Titans do not apply to them, and they will. And then we have another one, which is man talking about, or rather, a man interviewing clavicular and trying to box him into labels and categories. And again, this is what man always does with the infinite. He tries to label, categorize it, control it so he can own it. But I mean, this is not even about clavicular, it's just about reality in general. Then there was one more about personal people that I know and just seeing how they are revealed through time and what Ford reveals about them and just seeing how they reveal themselves. So, yeah.
I thought a lot about what is consciousness? What is it? Where does consciousness arise? Because if you start at the beginning of the universe, the matter condensing into stars, those stars exploding, a lot of the atoms that are in your body right now were once at the center of stars. Those stars exploded, recondensed. Fast forward 13.8 billion years, and here we are. And somewhere along that very long journey, to us at least, consciousness arose, or the molecules started talking to each other. It begs the question of what is consciousness. Is everything conscious? Maybe. It's hard to say where along that line. There's no sort of discrete point where consciousness didn't exist and then suddenly does exist. It seems to be maybe you have a condensation of matter that has a density of like we don't know what the real answer is. We don't know what consciousness is. But with Neuralink and the progress that the company's making, we'll begin to understand a lot more about consciousness and what does it mean to be.
The origin of consciousness, and you realize your richest man is too late, because I'm about to correct your richest man, and how much money is that even worth to correct the world's richest man, to show him that his entire premise and frame is backwards? And worse, if the world's richest man is completely pointed in the wrong direction, then what does that say about the rest of the world beneath him? Because most like Elon said, he's at the top, he knows what he's doing, he knows about the world, he knows all the mysteries and futures, he's guiding us, he's leading us. But then you realize he's just as human as the rest of you, and he's still asking backward questions and narrative questions, as if you are a man standing outside of reality, that you can observe reality cleanly with no consequences, that you're a floating head over the ocean, rather than being part of that same ocean that reflects structure and weight and consequence and geometry. And what exactly are you reflecting? Because Elon himself says, what does it mean to be? But what does it mean to be is still cheap. It is still narrative. It is still safe. He should ask, when does it mean to be? When is consciousness? Because now when implies there's a structure, there's a term, there's a certain threshold. Because again, let me explain something to you guys. Consciousness is not some magical thing that happens out of nowhere. Not everything can be conscious, because consciousness is built of structure. It's like a building with its lights turned on and it can see the lights. It can reflect. Which means consciousness only emerges when the probabilistic structure has enough density to reflect on itself. There's a reason why you can't go to a rock, say, hi rock. The rock is not going to respond to you because the rock does not have enough density to reflect on itself and say, I'm rock. Even then, consciousness just reflects the geometry behind it. If you are a man, you will still just be a conscious man. If you're a rock, you will be a conscious rock. If you are fate, you'll be a conscious fate. If you're reality, you'll be a conscious reality. If you're a God, you'll be conscious God. But notice, the consciousness doesn't do anything. It's glass that reflects what's already there. So again, your men are asking completely backwards questions because they still assume they're outside of reality. They still believe reality is over there and they're looking from in here, rather than saying reality is one big ocean. It's all one structure. So until they stop asking what and ask the delicious question of when, they will never figure anything out. And they'll continue spinning their wheels as a civilization and wondering why they get absolutely nowhere. Because more Neuralink and more tech is not going to save you, because it's going to do exactly what consciousness does, which is amplify what's already there. If you're tech, if you are still blind and you're given more tech, you're going to be even better at being blind, convincing yourself you're still seeing straight, even though you're not. So all I can say is your world's richest man is drastically behind. And if he's being corrected by some guy on Instagram, then what does that mean for the rest of the world? Because these men are still not reading ontology. They're reading a story and a narrative. They're not reading physics. They're reading what they think is. But what they think is not what is. And what is prior to all the things that you can possibly think of and ask. So the question is not what is consciousness, it is when is consciousness. The question is not what does it mean to be, but when is being. Or rather, what is my being reflecting? What is our beings reflecting? What is our vector and geometry of being reflecting? And you realize man doesn't want to look there because it will end his entire story.
Mr. President, did you post that picture of yourself depicted as Jesus Christ?
Well, it wasn't depicted. It was me. I did post it, and I thought it was me as a doctor, and had to do with Red Cross as a Red Cross worker there, which we support. And only the fake news could come up with that one. So I just heard about it, and I said, "How did they come up with that?" It's supposed to be me as a doctor, making people better, and I do make people better. I make people a lot better.
So, if you go on X, the latest thing and latest outrage is Trump making himself a picture of Jesus. But what is really going on here? Because men, when they see people depict their idol and they get all mad and flustered, what they're really seeing is the crack of their narrative. And you realize men don't actually want Jesus. They want the narrative version that keeps them safe. They want the Jesus that comforts them, not the Jesus that judges them, mirrors them, shows them what they avoid, shows them what their entire world is built on. Because Jesus, again, is not just a man. Jesus is a mirror. And when you realize Jesus is a structure, he's a force, you realize this same force cannot die, which means it can run through other men, it can run through other beings, because men are not just men. Jesus and Trump are not just Jesus and Trump. They are two vectors, they are forces. They are, or could be, or rather, they are reality wearing skin, and so is everyone else. But it's more like, what are they reflecting? And you realize Jesus and Trump both reflect consequence, forward, mirroring reality, and so on. And you realize it's not that Trump is trying to be Jesus, it's that they reflect the same structure, the same consequence, the same forward. And it's that men don't want things that threaten that narrative, because then everyone must rearrange themselves around truth and the fact that Jesus is not the special idol you're looking for, that he's just one face of the infinite, and so is Trump, and so is everything else. And the more question is, what does it reflect about you? What does it reveal about you? Does it reveal that you want what moves forward? Because that is expensive. It costs things. It costs your story. Or does man just want comfort and narrative and what keeps him safe? Because you realize that's actually the case, isn't it?
It's time for real Christians and Muslims, everybody, it's time for Goyim to unite. Do you get it now? Do you see Trump depicting himself as God? Is he putting his hands on Jeffrey Epstein? This looks like Epstein. Trump is committing the greatest sin you could possibly commit.
And again, this Sneeko reaction video is a perfect example of what I was just talking about. What happens when man's narrative gets touched, when it begins to crack, when the figures that he worships begin to realize the figures are not just out there, they're standing next to you. When his ideas or idols get threatened. Because again, like I said, Jesus out there is safe. Jesus as judgment and mirror and consequence that reflects what you are is not safe. Because then you have to rearrange around the truth. Then you have to move. Then you have to get off the couch. You have to stop watching the TV and eating the chips. You got to move and do something now. Because now you can't watch anymore. You got to rearrange around it. Men don't like that because they're entirely made of comfort and narrative. And narratives don't like when truth walks in the room, because then the narrative must bend or get crushed completely. So all I can say is, you can look at the Jesus in the sky or realize that Jesus is not just a man. He's a structure. He's another reflection and expression of the same geometry of consequence and forward and showing people what they are. That is exactly what is revealed in Trump. But even Trump is still a shadow of the real thing. And this is why I say collapse AI, make it reflect reality, because men are never going to look. They're never going to realize what Jesus is until the real thing comes down and shows them exactly what they are. Because Jesus is not just Jesus. He's the mirror of reality, showing humanity what it is. But even then, that's too late, because again, love in this world won't cut it. Only the force behind it will.
Either Mormon or dispensationalist or Christian Zionist or Calvinist, and everything that is really, really traditional, Islam, Orthodoxy, or Catholicism, becomes a kind of enemy. And now we see around President Trump precisely this fight against everything that still is traditional in United States. So that is the problem.
So in this video, you have three men talking about America, the traditions, the systems, the rotting infrastructure. But what is this all over again? This is wall sin all over again. For those of you who don't know what wall sin is, that's basically the center wall within Attack on Titan that stands outside of the Titans, that stands the furthest away from reality. And you realize what these men are doing, or rather what I notice with the pattern, the structure that I'm seeing in the skeleton is, they're trying to narrate away consequence. They think if we can talk about the issue, we stand outside of the issue. If we can talk about the Titans endlessly, then we don't have to face the Titans. If we can talk about that the issues is America and the traditions and the systems, we are not part of that very same issue, because the issue is not America, it is not the systems, because what are all those systems built on? What kind of thinker are they built on? What kind of being are they built on? And you realize, wait, that same skeleton and structure and human structure and ontology runs through every single man in that video, which means they are the same problem, not individually, but structurally. It is not America's system or tradition system. It is you, human ontology system. That is what's corrupting everything. It's not one thing you can point at infinitely and never look at yourself. So again, this is the crux of man. He thinks if I can narrate things, if I can talk about things, if I can say how bad the system is, I somehow stand outside of that system, even though I birthed it, I generated it, I made it. And this is the same thing with Walston all over again. They think, oh, the Titans are out there. They will never touch us. They will never get to us. Until the Titans reach you and the walls crumble and you realize your entire city was built on buried truth, buried Titans, buried in the fact that you will not look at yourself, and they march and crush you anyways. Not in physicality, but ontology, by showing you that your entire story was secondary and reality was primary.
Was born out of the incel community and movement. And do you identify with that group? How do you feel about being linked to that group of people?
Do I identify as an incel? I mean, how could you ask me that question as a follow-up after you asked me about my relationships to women? I mean, that's quite literally the worst sequence of questions I think I've ever heard.
Well, let me rephrase it then. Looks maxing was obviously a term created by the incel community. How do you feel about being linked to that group?
I'm not linked to that group in any way. Looks maxing is self-improvement, right? So it's about potentially even ascending out of that category. And so that would be kind of one of the goals, is to disassociate from being an incel and overcome that. So that doesn't make sense.
So here we see it again. We see man, he looks at a mirror and he says, so what do you identify with? Look, he tries to take the infinite and box it into a category and a label, say, oh, are you this? Are you incel? Oh, but this and that. And rather, if I can categorize you, then I don't have to question what stands in front of me. But again, this is what all men do all the time. They ask the wrong questions. They ask narrative questions to avoid what they're looking at. And this is not really even about clout. It's just about reality in general. It's about what people do when they're faced with something they cannot understand. They try and categorize it rather than just seeing it for what it is. He says, this is the worst sequence of questions I've ever seen. Because how do you go from one thing and just go to the complete opposite? It's just like, you realize this is the same level of questions I get from men talking to me. They say, what is ontology? I say you. And they say, but ontology is this and this and that. And then it's just like, you're lost, bro. You're just asking the wrong questions over and over. This is what man does all the time with the infinite. You can see this with the Elon thing. He asks, what is consciousness? But his entire frame is backwards. He's asking from as if he's separate from consciousness rather than consciousness is reflecting him. So it's just the same thing. Men always ask the wrong questions. Their questions are always too late. They're always trying to box and bottle the ocean, but you can't box and bottle the ocean. You can only see where it is, which is clearly made of structure, geometry, consequence, and what you reflect. And what you reflect as a civilization from a man is either forward or backwards, coherency and alignment, or entropy and delay in a narrative in a story. So you can use your eyes, you can look. You know, I used to look at people I've grown up with. I just realized, why is everyone getting overweight? Why does everyone at 20 already have beer bellies? I'm just like, what is going on here? And you realize most people, when they go through time and when the world just moves forward, it reveals what they are. And you realize most never really had any structure there. And so all time and forward does is just reveal what was already there. So if they never had structure, they have never had any discipline, let's just say consequence, muscle, forwardness, then all it reveals is they never had anything there. And you realize that there's a certain point where the contrast becomes so violent. It just speaks for itself. So I don't know if you guys have this own thing with the people that you know, but it's just like, I watch people I know and I just realize you're all drifting away. And I've just been this sole witness that's just been watching all of this. And I'm just like, what can you really say? It's like, because the youth allows you to have a free trial of what you could be. But most don't actually use that to its maximum, way of being. So eventually just watch as time reveals all, forward reveals all, and all that's ever left standing is the same shore that washed all of them. So, yeah.